I am a proud member of my local International Plastic Modeler Society, or IPMS for short, and I've been attending meetings for several years now, and it's where my love of scale models has continued to be nurtured. Recently, my club started hosting mini competitions at our meetings, and if you have followed me for any amount of time, you'll know that I've always wanted to build a diorama from scratch, so I was determined to enter last month's competition. The theme for May was May Day Mayhem, with a focus on rescue vehicles, which does present a little bit of a challenge for me as I don't actually own any rescue vehicles outright. However, what I do have is a massive Warhammer bits collection, and I remembered that amongst them I had a couple of scout servitors from the Space Hulk game that I think I could use as my vehicle. Once the idea of having a rescue servitor was firmly planted in my brain, a story started to emerge. One of a fallen comrade being rescued by a fellow soldier and the apothecary servitor that they found. Thankfully, my club is extremely open to Warhammer and Gunpla, so I was confident I would be able to create something for the May Day event and that my narrative would fit the theme. Now, let's take you through the process of building my first competition diorama scene. Several years ago, I acquired some tiered display cases from Daiso, and I thought one of those would work for my first diorama base due to its approachable scale. Additionally, the two-tier step reminded me of famous Warhammer stair scenes, and I took inspiration from that. With my canvas determined, it was time to start finding the terrain bits I wanted to sculpt my scene with. I wanted to set the scene in a war-torn Imperial city caught in the midst of a siege, because I not only have an excess of spare Imperial ruin bits, but also because I knew I wanted to use Imperial Guardsmen as the main characters that the rescue servitor would be aiding. So, I dug up a variety of sprues from ye old bits bin with crumbling walls and broken floors and clipped out a number that I could use to dry fit on the base to start framing the environment. I found it helpful to use a mounting putty to keep the pieces in place while I created the scene. Once I had the basics of the environment tacked into place, I turned my attention to looking for gear and equipment pieces I could add to the environment to tell the story of the two guardsmen and their rescue. Actually, one of the main reasons I chose to do an Imperial Guard scene was because I knew I had a clamshell full of spare guard bits, loose helmets, jerry cans, crates, sandbags, and other accessories I could use as scatter terrain to build out my environment. After picking out a choice selection of bits, I toyed with the composition before being happy with my placement, removed the temporary putty, and glued them properly down onto the base. A base that I'm very pleased with, however, it is looking way too clean for a war zone, so next let's add texture to the base. Hey guys, I'm just jumping into the video to remind you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because I know most of you aren't. If you're into the spicier side of the content, then you should join my VIP page. New members get 50% off their first month subscription, and I really hope to see you there. Now, let's go ahead and get back to the video. I want to add texture to the entirety of the base's exposed black plastic, and to do that, we're going to need to get a little bit messy, which is why we've come back up here to my hobby desk. Since my scene is taking place under fire in an Imperial city, I want to give the illusion that Duracrete has collapsed around the characters, and in order to do that, we're going to be getting a little bit old-fashioned, instead of working with the pre-made tufts and texture paints that I usually do. Before anything, I will need to spread an adhesive to keep all the loose material in place. I decided to go with all game terrain basing glue because it's what I had on hand, but I'm sure Elmer's would have worked. And a large sheet brush to spread it around so that it covers all of the exposed black plastic. Once the glue was spread evenly across the base, using a second plastic container to catch the loose material that doesn't stick, I dumped the first of my two gravel materials all over the base, without a lot of concern for where it went. And it looked great, but very messy. But that's nothing a small amount of water and another cheap brush won't fix. While I engaged in some cleanup, I noticed a few areas that needed more glue and gravel, which my small brush helped me take care of easily. Satisfied with the first layer, I moved immediately on to adding the bigger, chunkier gravel material with a spot gluing technique. As I wrapped up adding the larger debris, I felt it didn't blend with the other gravel well enough, so I went back in with the original gravel and blended the two layers together. An easy and really enjoyable fix. After letting the glue dry for a couple of hours, all that was left was to seal the material in place with some all-game terrain super seal solution. Then I set the foundation aside to dry overnight, and the next day turned my attention to the guardsmen themselves. At this stage, I was feeling confident about how my base was looking, and I had developed more of the narrative around my scene as I had been working on it, giving me a clearer picture of what I would need for my guardsman's poses. There are two guardsmen I decided to assemble for this rescue scene, one that is injured and lying prone, and the other who is kneeling over his fallen comrade. This is a composition I've seen in a lot of other war dioramas. However, it's also one that I knew I could achieve in the time I had available. Into another bit spin I go, this time for the bits I can use for the guardsman and for the little servitor I knew I'd assembled for my copy of Space Hulk. Thankfully, this household does not have a Warhammer collecting problem, so it didn't take me long to find a few usable sprues and other loose bits I could work with. Armed with clippers, sandpaper, and glue, I got to work cleaning the individual bits I would need for the two men: heads, arms, legs, torsos. After allowing the glue to dry, I noticed some gaps around the modifications I had made, so I came back with a two-part epoxy called green stuff to fill the gaps. You might have seen this stuff before, but if you haven't, all you need to do is mix equal parts of the blue and yellow parts together until it's fully green, and voila! You have a material that you can use to gap fill, reinforce, or if you're feeling extra bold and creative, to sculpt. With my poses locked in place, I grabbed the base and fiddled with where I wanted them to sit on the diorama. However, I won't be gluing them down yet. First, I need to paint everything. The part of this project that I was most worried about was now behind me. I had been really concerned about getting natural poses out of my figures, but thanks to the sheer selection of choice I had, thanks to the size of my bits collection, and some creative limb harvesting, I got exactly what I wanted out of my guardsmen. Which means that now it's time to prep them for paint and get this diorama finished. To make my life easier, I decided to keep the base and the figures separated while I painted them. Now, if you've watched any of my painting tutorials before, you are going to be familiar with the priming technique I'm about to use, as I use it all the time. However, still, let's see how we apply the grisaille technique to terrain. I started by priming the base and all the figures in a neutral gray color. I chose Mechanica Standard Gray for this because it's right in the middle of black and white hue-wise and works perfectly as the foundation for this technique. Then it was back inside to build up highlights on the model using a dry brush and progressively lighter and lighter grays until the final highlight using a pure white. This took some time, but that's because I wanted to make sure I really brought out small details that would add to the narrative that I'm telling, such as the prepping of the pox marks on the wall from recent gunfire. My base is ready for additional colors, and I think the metallic details are what I want to focus on next. But for now, that's where I'm going to leave you. Next time, we'll be back and we'll be putting more paint on my diorama. And not only that, but I'll also be able to tell you exactly how my diorama placed at my meetings competition. And I'm actually going to be taking it to a full-blown separate competition, and I'll even have the results of that for you by the time we have our next video out. I am so incredibly excited to take this thing to a real, genuine competition against strangers and not just my friends at my club. I'm also extremely nervous, so you'll have to let me know how I did so far. Tell me any hints or tips that you might give me for next time when I build my next diorama, and I hope to see you next time when I show off how I painted it and how it did at its competitions. I am so hyped, and thank you so much for being here with me. Before I head out, I do want to give a huge, massive thank you to not only my YouTube members, but also my patrons, because without your guys' support, we just wouldn't be able to make content like this for you. I wouldn't be able to build cool dioramas, and I wouldn't be able to share it with you. So thank you guys so much for the support, and I'll see you all next time. I've been Angela, and I hope you have a wonderful hobby night. Bye.